Iryna Zarutska was born in Ukraine, into a family that valued resilience. She grew up during years of political tension, but she never imagined that full-scale war would one day erupt around her. In her teenage years, she watched her country change dramatically. After the Russian invasion, she and her family endured nights of fear sirens wailing, glass shattering, and the terrifying uncertainty of whether they would live to see morning. For Iryna, life was about survival. She saw neighbors lose their homes, schools reduced to rubble, and entire families displaced. War stripped away her sense of safety and stability. She decided to leave with determination. She applied for refugee status, hoping for a chance to build a new life far away from the bombs. America seemed like a dream. For Iryna, Charlotte, North Carolina, was not just a city, it was a promise, a place where she could study, work, and finally breathe without fear. Friends who knew her in Charlotte describe her as warm, driven, and eager to learn. She was fascinated by American culture and proud of her Ukrainian heritage. She quickly adapted, learning English phrases, exploring her surroundings, and even making friends who would become her support network. Despite her trauma, she was optimistic. She believed that her story would be one of survival, not tragedy. Her parents, still in Ukraine, spoke proudly of her journey. For them, she was living proof that hope could exist even in dark times. Iryna's future was bright. She talked about continuing her studies, perhaps working in business or technology, and one day starting a family. But behind that optimism, there were struggles. She sometimes felt isolated, far from home, and the weight of trauma often returned in silence. Yet she refused to let pain define her. Instead, she carried herself with quiet strength. Charlotte was not just a city. It was her fresh start. She often posted small snapshots of her life on social media, cafes she visited, parks she walked through, and the sense of belonging she was slowly building. To her friends, she represented resilience. To her family, she was their hope. And on August 22, 2025, she was just another young woman heading home after a long day boarding a light rail train that countless others had taken before her. That train, the Lynx Blue Line, connected different corners of Charlotte. It was seen as safe, ordinary, and unremarkable. Iryna likely thought of her plans for the coming days. Perhaps she was messaging a friend or scrolling through her phone. She did not know that another passenger, sitting just feet away, carried a past filled with violence and instability. She did not know that this train ride would be her last, and she could not know that the man who would end her life had been given chance after chance by a system that consistently failed. August 22, 2025, was warm in Charlotte. The sun had set, and the evening carried the usual rhythm of commuters heading home. Iryna boarded the train like countless others. She found a seat, her thoughts drifting, unaware of the danger nearby. Witnesses later recalled how quiet the train was. Some passengers scrolled through phones. Others stared out of windows. Nothing seemed unusual. Among the passengers was DeCarlos Brown Jr., a 34-year-old man who blended into the crowd but carried a hidden weapon, and an unpredictable mind. Brown had boarded with a knife concealed. He showed no signs of agitation at first, no indication that violence was moments away. Passengers later said there was no argument, no words exchanged between him and Iryna. Suddenly, without warning, Brown lunged. He pulled out the knife and struck. Panic filled the carriage. Iryna gasped as the blade pierced her body. He struck her 3 times, one blow fatally to her neck. People screamed. Some rushed to help. Others scrambled for safety, stunned by the randomness of the attack. A young man who had been sitting nearby tried to stop the bleeding, pressing his hands against her wounds, but the damage was already too severe. Within moments, Iryna collapsed. The life she had fought so hard to preserve was slipping away in seconds. The train screeched to a halt at the next station, where first responders rushed aboard. Medics tried desperately to revive her, but she was gone. On a train that should have carried her home, her story ended. Brown attempted to flee but was quickly caught by police. Officers found the knife still stained with blood. Witnesses described his face as cold, detached, as if he were unaware of the horror he had caused. For passengers, the scene was haunting. A young woman's body on the floor, her belongings scattered, her life extinguished in silence. News of the killing spread quickly. Reporters rushed to the station, covering a crime that seemed too shocking to believe. For Charlotte, it was a wake-up call. Violence had invaded the city's everyday spaces. And for Iryna's family in Ukraine, the news was unthinkable. Their daughter had escaped war, only to be murdered in America. But the story did not end there. To understand how this tragedy happened, we must look at the man behind the knife. Carlos Brown Jr. was no stranger to law enforcement. His name appeared again and again in police records, stretching back years. From a young age, Brown displayed troubling behavior. He was involved in fights, thefts, and assaults. As he grew older, his crimes escalated. He was arrested for armed robbery, drug possession, and violent altercations. Court records show that he spent time in and out of jail, but he was often released on probation. Yet Brown's past was not just criminal, it was medical. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that, untreated, can lead to dangerous delusions. Family members reported that Brown suffered from paranoia, hearing voices, and violent mood swings. He was hospitalized multiple times, sometimes involuntarily. But the system rarely kept him for long. Doctors prescribed medication, but Brown often refused to take it. Without treatment, his condition worsened. Friends and relatives said he could be calm one moment and explosive the next, a ticking time bomb no one could predict. He had previously threatened strangers and had been involved in violent incidents that alarmed those around him. Despite this, he remained free, moving through society with little oversight. Critics argue that the justice system failed twice. First, by not ensuring he received adequate treatment, and second, by allowing him to access weapons. By the time Brown boarded that train, his past was an unresolved storm of crime and illness. To the other passengers, he looked like just another man. But beneath the surface, his mind was spiraling. Psychologists later explained that untreated schizophrenia, combined with past trauma and criminal tendencies, can create extreme unpredictability. Brown's life was a pattern of arrests, short sentences, and releases. Each time, he slipped further into instability. Authorities had warning signs. He was a known risk. Yet the system chose release over confinement, medication over long-term care. And on August 22nd, that failure became fatal. For Iryna, Brown was a stranger. For the city, he was a tragedy waiting to happen. And now, his name is forever tied to the death of a young refugee who deserved so much more. News of Iryna's murder spread across Charlotte and beyond. The idea that a refugee who had survived war was killed on a local train horrified the community. Vigils were held at the station. Candles, flowers, and photos of Iryna created a memorial for a life cut short. Her friends wept, her community mourned, and strangers who never met her felt the injustice deeply. In Ukraine, her family was devastated. Her mother said, "She escaped the war to find peace, and now she is gone. How can I accept this?" Prosecutors wasted no time. Brown was charged with first-degree murder at the state level. But federal prosecutors also stepped in. Because the killing happened on a public transit system, Brown faced federal murder charges, crimes that can lead to life imprisonment or even the death penalty. The case sparked heated debates about mental health care. Many argued that Brown should never have been unsupervised, given his history. Others pointed to the justice system's failures, short sentences, ignored warning signs, and lack of accountability. Public officials promised to review transit security, but for many, it felt like too little, too late. Advocacy groups used Iryna's death to highlight the dangers of untreated mental illness, urging reforms in how high-risk individuals are managed. The Ukrainian community in Charlotte came together, offering support and demanding justice. Online, people around the world expressed outrage. How could a young woman escape bombs in Ukraine only to be killed in America? For Iryna's family, the legal proceedings were cold comfort. No trial, no sentence could undo the pain of losing their daughter. Brown's defense lawyers argued his mental illness should be considered, but prosecutors insisted his past showed he knew what he was doing. The trial promises to be long and emotional, raising questions about accountability, sanity, and justice. Meanwhile, the city remembers Iryna, Her story became a symbol, a reminder that safety cannot be taken for granted. Every train ride now carries the shadow of her memory. Every discussion about crime and mental health circles back to her name. She is gone, but her story continues to shape debates about justice and safety in America. The question remains, could this have been prevented? If the system had acted sooner, would Iryna still be alive? For her loved ones, the answer doesn't matter. What matters is that a life filled with promise was stolen in a moment of senseless violence.
So let's set the scene. It's a warm August evening, August 22nd, 2025, Charlotte, North Carolina. And you've got the Lynx Blue Line light rail just doing its usual thing, carrying commuters home. Among them, Iryna Zarutska, just, on her way home like anyone else. You might have been on a train like that yourself, maybe scrolling through your phone, thinking about dinner, totally unaware of the different lives, the different stories moving around you. And this deep dive, it's really about Iryna. She was a young woman who'd escaped unimaginable things back in war-torn Ukraine. Our sources talk about her enduring these nights of fear, sirens, shattering glass, just this constant, terrifying uncertainty. Coming to America, Charlotte specifically, that was her dream. It was like a promise, a new life, a chance to finally breathe without fear. But then on that incredibly ordinary train ride, her journey, this vibrant path she was forging, it just collided tragically with another passenger, a man. He had a hidden weapon and, a past filled with violence, instability.
A past shaped by a system that, according to the information we've looked at, seems to have consistently failed. So today, we're going to unpack not just the awful event that ended Iryna's life, but these two vastly different stories that intersected right there. And the really critical questions they force us to ask about resilience, yes, but also about safety, mental health care, and ultimately justice. Okay, let's get into these sources.
It's quite something, isn't it? How two lives shaped by such incredibly different intense experiences, one escaping war, the other navigating this really troubled history and, system failures, how they just converged in that one awful moment on a public train. It really forces you to look beyond the surface at how individual lives connect or sometimes tragically collide with these bigger societal issues.
That's a really important point. Let's start with Iryna. Her journey, it's one of incredible hope, really, resilience. She was born in Ukraine, family valued strength. And our sources, they talk about her growing up with all this political tension, witnessing huge changes, and then, of course, the full-scale war. The reality was just brutal. Our sources paint this picture of neighbors losing homes, schools reduced to rubble, families displaced. That kind of experience, you can only imagine, it just strips away your feeling of safety.
Absolutely. And to really get Iryna's story, you have to understand the sheer trauma. For her, life became about survival, pure and simple. So her decision, to seek refugee status, it wasn't just moving countries. It was this act of, profound determination, this desperate hope for a life far away from the bombs, a search for peace, really.
And America, Charlotte, became the focus of that hope. Her dream, as the sources put it, not just a place, but a promise. Somewhere she could finally study, work, and breathe without fear. People who knew her there, they described her as warm, driven, eager to learn, really embracing American life, but also, importantly, proud of her Ukrainian heritage. And she adapted quickly, didn't she? Learning English, exploring, building that crucial support network.
Yeah, and what's really striking, considering everything she'd been through, was her optimism. She genuinely felt her story would be one of survival, not tragedy. Her parents back in Ukraine, they saw her as living proof that hope could exist even in dark times. That kind of resilience, that drive to rebuild after such devastation. It's just, it's quite remarkable.
It really is. Our sources talk about her future plans too. Continuing studies, maybe a career in business or tech, thinking about family someday. But, behind that positive outlook, the sources do mention silent struggles, moments of isolation, the trauma echoing back. Still, she apparently refused to let pain define her, carried herself with this quiet strength. Charlotte was her fresh start. She documented it, didn't she?
Yeah.
Social media photos of cafes she visited, parks she walked through, finding that sense of belonging bit by bit.
And that narrative, that hope she was so carefully building against this backdrop of war and loss, it just makes what happened on August 22nd feel even more.
Yeah, acutely tragic. She had survived a war zone, painstakingly built a new life, only for it to be extinguished so senselessly. Which brings us right back to that evening, August 22nd, 2025. Warm night, commuters heading home, just normal. Iryna gets on the Lynx Blue Line, a system everyone saw as safe, ordinary, and unremarkable. Maybe she was, texting a friend, scrolling her phone, thinking about the weekend, completely unaware of the danger nearby.
Yeah.
No possible way she could have known that this ride, this ordinary commute, would be her last.
Right. And this is where DeCarlos Brown Jr., who was 34, comes into the picture. He gets on the same train, blends in, but he's carrying a concealed knife. What's stressed in the witness accounts we reviewed is that initially he showed no signs of agitation, no indication that violence was moments away. Critically, there was no argument, no words exchanged between him and Iryna, nothing. It just looked like any other train ride. Until it wasn't.
And then, just chillingly fast, our sources say, without warning, Brown lunged. He struck Iryna 3 times with a knife, one blow fatally to her neck. Instant chaos, panic. People screamed. Some rushed to help. Others just scrambled, stunned by how random, how sudden it was. There was a young man who tried desperately, apparently, to stop the bleeding, but the injuries were just too severe.
And within moments, Iryna collapsed. Her life, the one she'd fought so hard for, just gone. The train stopped abruptly at the next station. Medics, first responders, they tried everything, but she was gone. Brown tried to run, but he was caught pretty quickly. The knife was recovered nearby, still stained with blood. Witnesses described his face later as looking cold, detached, almost unaware of the horror he'd just inflicted.
Imagine being on that train. Just a haunting scene. A young woman dead, her things scattered, a life just wiped out. The news hit Charlotte hard. It became this wake-up call, really. And then think about her family back in Ukraine, receiving that news. Our sources call it unthinkable. She escapes a war only to be murdered in the place she saw as her sanctuary. It's just devastating.
Yeah, and to really understand how something this horrific could happen, we have to look at DeCarlos Brown Jr.'s history. The sources paint a picture, a really disturbing one, of missed signals, missed opportunities, and deep systemic failures.
Right. So Brown, he was, as sources state, no stranger to law enforcement. His police records stretch back years. We're talking about a pattern of troubling behavior, starting young fights, thefts, assaults, and as he got older, it escalated significantly. Armed robbery, drug possession, violent altercations. He was just in and out of jail, often released back on probation. Kind of a revolving door situation, it sounds like.
And here's the critical piece, the medical component. Our sources are clear. Brown had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. That's a severe mental illness. And when it's untreated, it can lead to, dangerous delusions, paranoia. Family members apparently reported exactly that. Paranoia, hearing voices, violent mood swings. He'd been hospitalized multiple times, sometimes involuntarily, but the system, as the sources describe it, rarely kept him for long. This is often where you see that tension, right, between patient rights, autonomy, and public safety concerns. The bar for long-term involuntary commitment is very high.
Especially if someone isn't seen as an immediate threat right at that moment of assessment, even with a history like his. And crucially, the sources say Brown often refused to take his prescribed medication, which, predictably made his condition worse. Friends, relatives, they saw it. He could be calm one moment and explosive the next, described as a ticking time bomb no one could predict. And it wasn't just potential violence. Sources confirm he had previously threatened strangers and been involved in other violent incidents.
Exactly. So you have this clear documented history of serious mental illness, non-compliance with treatment, escalating violence. Yet, he remained free, moving through society with little oversight. It just begs that question, where were the safeguards?
Precisely. And critics, looking back now to these sources, argue the system failed on multiple levels. First, by not ensuring he got adequate and sustained treatment, which is key. Right. And second, by effectively allowing someone with this history, in untreated condition, access to weapons, or at least not preventing it.
Right. The psychologist quoted explained that untreated schizophrenia, combined with past trauma and criminal tendencies, can create extreme unpredictability, sometimes driven by things like command hallucinations, a total break from reality. And there's often that issue of anosognosia, the lack of insight into one's own illness. It makes getting people to stick with medication incredibly challenging. So the authorities, they had warning signs he was a known risk. no question. But the system, maybe due to legal constraints, resource issues, whatever the reason, it chose release over confinement, medication over long-term care. Or rather, short-term meditation attempts over enforced long-term care. And on August 22nd, that pattern, that systemic gap, had fatal consequences. It really forces a hard look at how we manage these complex situations.
The impact of Iryna's murder was just immediate and widespread. It horrified the community in Charlotte, and the story resonated globally. Vigils popped up at the station, a memorial grew, candles, flowers, photos of Iryna. Her friends, the local community, just devastated. But even strangers felt this profound sense of injustice, and her mother's words from Ukraine, quoted in the sources, just heartbreaking. She escaped the war to find peace, and now she is gone. How can I accept this?
Yeah. Legally, things moved fast. Brown was charged with first-degree murder at the state level, and because it happened on public transit, federal prosecutors also stepped in. Federal murder charges were filed, which, as the sources note, can lead to life imprisonment or even the death penalty. In this case, as you'd expect, just blew up the debate around mental health care. Many people arguing Brown should never have been unsupervised, calling for stricter involuntary commitment laws. Others pointed fingers squarely at the justice system's failures, the short sentences, the ignored warnings, the perceived lack of accountability for someone posing such a clear risk.
Right. Public officials made promises, pledged to review transit security, but for a lot of people, it felt like too little, too late. Understandably. Advocacy groups really highlighted Iryna's death as a tragic example. They started pushing hard for reforms in how we manage high-risk individuals with severe mental illness, focusing on that need for both better treatment and better public safety measures. Finding that balance, the Ukrainian community in Charlotte really came together, and Iryna's story sadly became this symbol. A reminder, as one source put it, that safety cannot be taken for granted.
No, it can't. And the sources capture that lingering feeling. Every train ride now carries the shadow of her memory. Every time people discuss crime, mental health in the city, her name comes up. Every discussion circles back to her name. And always, that inescapable question, could this have been prevented? It hangs over everything, not just for those who knew her, but for the whole community, for us looking at it now.
So we've traced these two paths. Iryna Zarutska's journey, incredible hope, resilience, a quest for peace, ending so brutally. And to Carlos Brown Jr.'s life, a path marked by untreated mental illness, violence, and a system full of, apparent gaps, profound gaps. This deep dive into the sources really underscores how interconnected things are. Individual lives, individual tragedies, and these larger societal structures that are supposed to protect us.
Absolutely. For Iryna's loved ones, the loss is immense. A life full of promise just stolen senselessly. But for us, looking at the whole picture, that question of prevention just won't go away, will it? What is our collective responsibility when the warning signs seem so clear? When the systems we rely on appear to falter, caught in that difficult space between individual liberty and public safety? When you think about those two lives crossing paths on that train, what really stands out to you?
It's a heavy question, and maybe something for all of us to think about. As you go about your day, maybe on your own commute, consider the unseen stories around you, the hidden struggles, the systemic challenges that are woven into the fabric of our everyday lives, often silently. How do we, as a society, ensure that promise of a fresh start, the kind Iryna so desperately sought, is actually protected? And how do we make sure that those grappling with severe mental health issues get the comprehensive, consistent, long-term care they need? Not just for their own well-being, but to prevent tragedies like this one. Something to really mull over.